the Trump team is not great on implementation. They're good on the photo op, they're good on the social posts, and obviously Trump adds another notch to his proverbial peace stick. But the follow through and the lasting peace doesn't seem to be there.
Sudan and the civil war there. It's been going on for 2 years between the Sudanese National Army and the Rapid Support Forces. Well, the latter has agreed to an American proposal for a ceasefire and is open to talks on a cessation of hostilities. The conflict has left tens of thousands dead, with hunger spreading across the country and millions being displaced by the fighting. Let's talk to Bruen, president of the Global Situation Room and former White House Global Engagement Director under President Obama. Brett, welcome back to the programme.
Good to be with you.
Thank you. How serious do you think this proposal is from the US? I think it's also Egypt, UAE, and a couple of other regional powers. What can one... I mean, how hopeful are you that the Rapid Support Forces are serious when they say, hey, there might be something in this, we're prepared to stop killing people?
Well, I think the seriousness ought to be judged by those in the Gulf who have been funding both the RSF as well as the Sudanese army. And this is where you're playing some three-dimensional diplomacy, trying essentially to get, the conflict on the ground to stop, but also applying pressure on the Saudis, on the Emiratis to say, look, this is getting out of control, and you need to rein it in because that just disastrous humanitarian situation, the slaughter of civilians at a hospital in Darfur only a couple weeks ago, made obviously international headlines, drew outcries, including from the UN Security Council. Now is when we have to see the effort, the pressure placed on all sides involved in this conflict.
And you mentioned some of the regional powers in the Gulf. Who is supporting whom? Which Gulf state is supporting which side of this terrible conflict, and why?
Well, you have to provide lots of caveats here, but the Emiratis certainly have been, according to a number of well-documented reports, backing the RSF. And why? Look, there are strategic resources that Sudan has. There's also, quite frankly, just the power dynamic. And oftentimes, I spent time as a diplomat in the Middle East. What you're seeing in these situations is that the conflicts that don't take place in those shiny cities in the Gulf take place in other places, whether it's Yemen or Sudan or Syria. And that's unfortunately what's playing out.
Right. And when it comes to the plan hatched by, well, I'm not sure if it was the Trump White House or whether it was Egypt or some of the Gulf states, how much do you know about it, and what do you think could bring the two sides who seem thus far implacably opposed and with almost a deep antipathy towards them? I mean, these two guys, the head of the Rapid Support Forces and the head of the Sudanese National Army, were allies, weren't they?
Yeah, and look, here's what's interesting. Trump has leveraged often, whether it was, Cambodia and Thailand, Azerbaijan and Armenia, the threats of tariffs and sanctions to try and push the parties, even some of the parties that are quite far apart, towards a solution, at least towards a ceasefire and to the negotiating table. Now, I have to say here, where this has often fallen short, and we're seeing it in Gaza, we've seen it already in places like Rwanda and the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, is that the Trump team is not great on implementation. They're good on the photo op, they're good on the social posts, and obviously Trump adds another notch to his proverbial peace stick. But the follow-through and the lasting peace doesn't seem to be there.
Yeah. Final thought, Marcus, one of our listeners, says, why are the UK not using our military heft to ask the Saudis, Emiratis, Egyptian and Turkey to stop funding militias and corrupt Sudanese government forces and stop the humanitarian suffering right now? Well, you sort of answered that in a way, but would you want to quickly give a response to Marcus?
Yeah, look, I think the thing about diplomacy that I learned in my time, both in the Situation Room and abroad, abroad, including in African conflicts, is there are different levers that different countries can press on. And essentially what you're trying to do is to corral a coalition together to say, right, you're going to press the RSF, you're going to press the Sudanese army, and on economic, on political, on a whole range of other issues, down to individuals that somebody has a relationship with, the Minister of Defense, the commander of a certain brigade or division. All of that plays a factor. That's how diplomacy gets done.
Okay. Brett Bruen, president of the Global Situation Room, a former White House Global Engagement Director under President Obama. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Times Radio.
With its economy and social services system and infrastructure in near collapse and no end to the conflict in sight, we estimate that nearly 2/3 of Sudan's total population, more than 30 million people, will require humanitarian assistance this year, kidnapped or remain missing or unaccounted for. Famine is occurring in hotspots in at least 5 locations in Sudan, with an estimated 1.3 million children under 5 living in these areas. Over 3 million children under 5 are at imminent risk of deadly disease outbreaks, including cholera, malaria, and dengue, due to the failing health system. 16.5 million school-aged children, nearly an entire generation, are out of school. This is not just a crisis, it's a polycrisis affecting every sector, from health and nutrition to water, education, and protection. We need your voices to ensure the protection of aid workers. UNICEF continues to receive alarming reports of grave violations against children trapped in this conflict, including their recruitment and use by armed groups. Between June and December 2024, more than 900 incidents of grave violations against children were reported, with a staggering 80% involving the killing and maiming of children, primarily in Darfur, Khartoum, and Al Jazeera states. Sadly, we know these numbers are just a fraction of the reality. Continues to respond wherever and however we can. In Sudan today, sexual violence is pervasive. It is used to humiliate, dominate, disperse, forcibly relocate, and terrify an entire population. Right now, an estimated 12.1 million women and girls, and increasingly men and boys, are at risk of sexual violence. This is an 80% increase from the previous year.
I thank Ms. Russell for her briefing.
Our teams in Chad treated over 800 wounded people in just 3 days as thousands of Masalite civilians fled El Janina after the Rapid Support Forces seized the city. Survivors told us how simply belonging to the Masalite community had in itself become a death sentence. The rainy season looms large, the hunger gap will widen. The crisis in Sudan demands a fundamental shift away from the failed approaches of the past. Millions of lives depend on it.
Looking ahead, in April, the United Kingdom's Foreign Secretary will convene foreign ministers in London to help end the conflict and to improve the humanitarian response. Bringing an end to the conflict will be a critical step towards ending sexual and gender-based violence in Sudan.
Consistent with President Trump's executive order on reevaluating and realigning United States foreign aid, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is conducting a review of all foreign assistance programs to ensure they are consistent with U.S. foreign policy. The Secretary of State approved a waiver for life-saving humanitarian assistance, covering emergency food, medicine, shelter, and subsistence assistance, including for Sudan.
السيدة الرئيسة، سوف أركز على موضوع العنف الجنسي وحقوق النساء ووضعية الأطفال والوضعية الصحية في هذا البيان. لقد تم استخدام العنف المسلح من قبل مقاتلي ميليشيا الدعم السريع كسلاح في الحرب، ويرقى ذلك إلى مرتبة جريمة حرب، حيث تم توظيف ذلك العنف الشيطاني محفزاً بنشر واسع لخطاب الكراهية القائمة على خطاب الاستعلاء العرقي وإنشاء أسواق نخاسة للنساء وبيع الفتيات مثل الجواري. ونعتقد أن اعتماد الخطة الوطنية لحماية المدنيين سيسهم كثيراً في تعزيز وتحصين حماية النساء والفتيات. ألا يخجل مندوب الأمارات من أن يقول أنه يدعم السودان إنسانياً؟ ذكر 200 مليون دولار قدمتها الإمارات لفعالية في إثيوبيا. في ثاني يوم قال نشطاء الدعم السريع إنهم سيوظفون هذه 200 مليون دولار لشراء أسلحة وطائرات لدولتهم أو لحكومتهم الجديدة.
The UAE reaffirms that it has not been a party to this conflict, is not a party to this conflict, and does not side with any party to this conflict. Falsehoods remain falsehoods, no matter how often they are repeated.
Our message today to the Council is that the war in Sudan cannot continue to be waged with a shameless disregard for civilian lives. Humanitarian aid must not be obstructed by the warring parties, civilians must not be attacked and killed time and time again, and life-saving international aid must be provided in sufficient quantities and with sufficient resolve to reach people in the midst of this devastating conflict.